you all so much for being here. My name is Mehrata Sandani. I am the Executive Director of Critical Connections, which is an organization here in the Valley that puts together events on issues related to Muslim communities. So on behalf of Critical Connections and Karuna Center for Peace Building, our partner, you'll hear from their director, Olivia Dreyer, in just a little bit. I'd like to welcome you all to our event today, Building Inclusive Communities, the Role of Faith Leaders. It is the first in a series of events that we're going to put together over the next few months here in the Valley, and it will focus on different sectors and the role different sectors can play in building inclusion and diversity and pluralism within their respective constituencies. Hello, that's one of our speakers. Welcome, Rabbi Katz. You made it just in time. And so the idea is that over the next few months we'll have sector-specific symposia, half-day symposia like today's, to talk about, have deeper conversations around these issues. We conceptualize the series primarily because this current moment that we're in has forced us to contend with the various forms of prejudice that exists in our communities. It's always been there, but it's sort of re-emerged. All of these issues have re-emerged with a vengeance, and we are being called to grapple with systemic and institutional racism, anti-Semitism, transphobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, and so many other different kinds of prejudices within our communities. Not just to sort of understand how we work at them at the institutional level, but also at the grassroots levels. So coming to our event today, we're going to today focus on the role of faith leaders and the role of clergy members in building inclusion, not just within their respective congregations, but also in the broader community. And we are extremely fortunate to have a stellar lineup of religious leaders and faith leaders who are at the forefront of bringing about positive change within their congregations and also in the community at large. You will hear more about their detailed bios and their work in the community from our moderators and from them themselves. Many of our speakers today are also part of the Inclusive Communities Coalition that Critical Connections put together a year ago, and that consists of educators and law enforcement, religious clergy, refugee resettlement agencies, and we've been in this ongoing conversation about how do we grapple with some of these issues around marginalization and exclusion. So thank you all so much for being here. Before I pass the mic on to Olivia Dreyer, I'd also like to say that today is we have our wonderful speakers, but today is really a day of shared learning and shared conversations, and we really hope that you will all contribute to the collective wisdom in this room as we have these conversations. Thank you so much. Hello. Hello. So anyway, so in the meantime, what I'll do is sort of pass the mic to, or the lack of mic to, the virtual mic to Olivia Dreyer, who is the director of Karuna Center and will sort of take us through the flow of the day. Thank you.
It's working.
Yes, just in time.
How's that?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, and welcome on behalf of Karuna Center for Peace Building as well. For those who don't know us, we've been around since the mid-90s, working on peace and reconciliation in war-torn parts of the world. Sort of a core mission of bridging divides and really recognizing the strength and creativity that exists in differences across the board. So most of our work is international. We've worked in some 30-plus countries over the years, but increasingly we feel a huge responsibility to do our small bit to work on divides in our own country as well. So we're really delighted to partner with Critical Connections on this series. So you all have the agenda for the day. I don't want to take more time away from the rich discussions that will follow, but just to give you a sense of the flow of the day, we've divided the day sort of in two parts. One focusing on how to build more inclusive faith communities sort of within the congregation or faith community, and the second will be looking more outwardly of the role of faith leaders in building more inclusive society, inclusive communities in the broader community. So first kind of looking in, secondly looking out. And for each we have a panel of speakers that will break into small group discussions with a series of guided questions. We want to focus the conversation since we have little time and it's such a broad topic. Then we'll have time for a plenary conversation in which we'll have just very, very brief report backs from the table conversations, and then really continue the conversation in the whole group, hopefully kind of in a layered way, kind of building our collective insights on this topic. And by the end of the day, we'll also think about what sort of follow-through would make sense. Since the theme is building inclusive communities, obviously we want as inclusive a process in the morning as possible, so I'm sure you're all facilitators in your own right and have a good sense of the kinds of guidelines or ground rules that really support that. But we just ask everybody to be mindful of the small groups or the large discussion of sharing airtime and really making sure we hear from the full range of voices in the room or at your tables.
I want to just express my deep joy at being here with all of you. I think it is an honor and a privilege whenever we gather together in greater community to model not only being kind and civil with each other, but more than that, going into deep conversation, maybe beginning to speak about harder topics like the ways in which our communities, both inside and out, contribute, sustain, enable the divisiveness that's so rampant in our culture at this time, and how we are grappling as people of faith to change that. And the places in which we are still struggling and maybe not doing a great job. So the more we can have honest conversation with each other, that really feels like the road and path to peace to me. The one that is real and has integrity and also dignity for each of our faiths. So I'm thrilled to welcome this morning 3 wonderful speakers. I'm going to introduce them as they speak so that it's one at a time. But I want to just let you know they each have only 10 to 12 minutes to speak, which is really not a lot of time to speak about a difficult or complex topic. They're shooting to really talk about how we strive to make our places of worship places of welcome and how difficult that is. So I'm going to invite them to speak about the risks and the strategies, the things that have worked, the things that are not yet working, however that is taking place in their own community. And so for the first person, I'd like to invite Imam Rasul Sifala to be our first panel speaker. Mr. Rasul Fahim Sifala was born and raised in Harlem, New York, educated in the Catholic school system, graduated from the Pratt Institute with a bachelor's in chemical engineering, and has worked for Exxon Chemical, Monsanto, and Mass Mutual Insurance Company. He is also a retired U.S. Army officer with 23 years of service. He currently serves as the resident imam of the Al-Baqi Institute, Islamic Center for Human Excellence, and I have known Imam Sifala to work together as part of the Interfaith Council of Western Massachusetts. I'm grateful to work beside him wherever our paths cross, and I'm so glad to welcome you today. Please come to speak. Russell. Wonderful.
Okay, good morning, everyone. With the name of Allah, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, I greet you in the greetings of peace in the Arabic language. Assalamu alaikum.
That's it.
We have any Muslims here? I'm here by myself. We are all Muslims. I came here this morning prepared to answer the wrong question. Yeah, I just found out it was some shifting that Melika did. So hopefully I'll be able to impart something to you that will get you to understand what goes on in the Muslim community. Now, the way I look at it, to be successful in including people, one of the things is that communities take on the character of the pastor, of the imam, That's the lead that they follow. And if you're not the type of person that's all embracing, they will not be the type of people that's all embracing. I asked them one time, if a gay person came in here, would they be allowed in the masjid? And we had various responses to that. But I asked them again, why not? And people, why not? People are here to learn. We got to be all embracing. They're our brothers and sisters, and we need to help them be the best human beings. You know what I'm saying? Be like us, but be the best human being that they're capable of becoming. That's why we changed the name. It used to be just the Al-Baqi Islamic Center, but we changed it to Al-Baqi Islamic Center for Human Excellence. That's why we made that change. But there was, anybody remember the Arthur Murray School of Dance? If you notice, I'm a master at that, because I'm up here dancing. But anyway, you have to make people think. You have to make people understand that it's not just about themselves, it's about all people. I tell them, when you see somebody walking down the street, they may be an alcoholic or a drug addict or whomever or whatever. But I said, when you look at that person, think about that person when they were a child. Think about them when they was a child walking down the street, or maybe at the Big E, holding hands with their father, skipping and eating cotton candy. Happy, innocent, wonderful children. Look at them that way. And then look at them today and say, what happened to that beautiful little girl and that beautiful little boy that got them from this point to that point? That's how we need to look at people. You know, not in disgust. One thing I have prepared, and I want to come from the Quran, I got 12 minutes, Melissa's counting, is Surah 49, that means chapter, verse 13. In it says, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that ye may despise each other. Verily the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous. And Allah has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all things. These are basic things that people need to understand within a community. So when you look at it, Allah created, he says, I made you into nations and tribes. So the diversity that we see in the world was created by God. And what I would tell them, get over it and accept it. We weren't meant to be the same. I looked in the dictionary, not the dictionary, on the computer, and I found out that we, according to DNA, we are 99 to 99.9% the same. But what I find in people, they relish that 0.1 to 1%, the difference. And we're taught that in school. We focus on the difference, but not the 99 to 99.9% that we are the same. And I think if we move to that point, a lot of the problems that we see in society today, we wouldn't be facing, because we know that we're so much alike. And I'm reading through my notes. I'm trying to get everything that's relative. You know, so that we may know one another. It means that we learn from one another. Everybody has something of value to give to the benefit of humanity. I have to make sure they understand that everybody has something of value to give to the benefit of humanity. This is conditioning a community. I got to get them out of that inside these walls. People think that's it. We do this inside the wall, we leave here, we leave that spirit behind the wall. You know, they got to take it out to the community. You got to be involved in the community. You got to be there when they need you. Now, as a black person, an experience I had recently, when the nation went into an uproar because President Trump said that he was not going to allow people from these 7 Muslim nations to come to America. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people out there protesting. But I say, we're talking about an inclusive society. We're talking about being active from the church and bringing people in. My question was, where were you all when black men and black women and black teenagers were being killed by policemen? Did you strike up a conversation within your communities? Did you bring anybody out to any of those rallies? But what I got from that, and I brought it back to my communities, we are in that fight by ourselves. Don't rely on anybody else. We have to do that by ourselves. Here's people that have never been to America, never fought in any wars, never made any contributions to the nation, but we got this outpouring of concern for those people. How much time I got?
Got time. You're good.
He's counting. He said I got 2 minutes. This is my boss.
You have more than 2.
So it says, I want you to know people because we can learn from people. Here in America, you know, my wife can cook Chinese food, she can cook Italian food, she can cook all of that, but how did she learn it? She learned it because we have all those different people here in America. So again, I go back to, I have to teach my people to be ready to accept other people as brothers and sisters and human beings, and that we're all the same. You know, we speak about homosexuality, etc. I have to get them to understand that Allah, God, gave every one of us free will. And with that free will, we have the opportunity to choose what we will and what we won't do. The other part of that is I'm not to judge anybody. You know, a person told me this one time, and it came out of some book he was reading. And someone said, he or she's going to hell. And God's response was, do you know something I don't know? Because I haven't judged them yet. So don't judge people. Now, the reason that anybody know anything about the Nation of Islam, that's how I came to Islam, through the Nation of Islam. And it was a very insular community. We didn't allow just everybody to walk in there. So a lot of these people came from that experience. I got 2 minutes. A lot of people came from that experience, so they were very suspicious of anybody that was not a part of that community. So I had to go through this whole process. When people come in, smile. I said, who wants to join a community that looks like a bunch of sourpuss? You know, smile. Be engaging. Get up when the service is over, shake hands, introduce yourselves. And then ask them are they ready to come in and do some work. You don't have to join, just you want to do some work. Get them actively involved. And you know what brings the people together is when they work together. Even in a religious institution, when they work together, they get closer. So that's the stage in the background. But you got to have a plan. I got 1 minute. You got to have a plan. And that plan is to teach people how to interact with people that are not the same as they are. It's an education process, you know, and it's difficult. It's difficult. In the beginning, I seen people come to visit us, don't know anybody, stand there after service is over, and they're by themselves. I get there, I say, where was that guest at? They're like, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You didn't go up there and speak to them, welcome them, make them feel good about making the effort to come out and visit you. So it's a conditioning process that you have to go through. I have to end, but I say this. If you're not doing it, look at the pastor, look at the imam, look at the rabbi, because they're not teaching you what you need to learn and know. Thank you.
So I want to ask Father Savage to be our next speaker. Father Warren Savage is a priest of the Diocese of Springfield. He is the Catholic chaplain and director of the Albert and Amelia First Interfaith Center at Westfield State University, lecturer, Religious Studies Department at Our Lady of the Elms College in Chicopee, instructor of the Diocesan Permanent Diaconate Formation Program, chairperson of the Diocesan Committee for Continuing Ed and Formation of Clergy. Father Savage, I have not had the pleasure of working directly with you, but many of my interfaith friends have, and speak very highly of your inclusivity and your open heart. And so I'm delighted and glad to hear you speak today, as I know many of us are. Please, if you will begin.
Thank you. So I was sent a list of questions, so I thought the best thing that I would do was work with the questions that were sent to me. Isn't that probably the wise thing to do?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So you send me these questions to make me work. I'm happy.
I'm delighted.
I'm happy. So I was told that my job was to present to you what I do personally to build an inclusive community with the people I work with. I have the fortunate privilege to work with multiple communities. Holyoke College, Amherst College, Elms College, Westfield State University, besides saying Mass, and many parishes throughout Western Massachusetts. So my job is by its nature inclusive. And then I get invited to things like this, which means I'm inclusive. And I say, yes, I will come. So most invitations that I receive as a Catholic priest, regardless of who they are, I usually try to show up. That's inclusive. Coming from that parking lot to this place was a chance for me to measure the extent of the human being's capacity to welcome and be inclusive, which means I said good morning to every single person that I met along the way. And I can only count 2 people who said good morning back. I walked by minimally 125 people. Inclusivity begins by looking into the face of the other person and saying, good morning. And if you have a response, then maybe some connection happens. But let's get into this. So I was given the challenge, I was given the guiding question, how do we overcome barriers to building inclusion and diversity within faith communities? And then the sub-questions from me and the panelists were threefold. What are the risks, personal, professional, spiritual, you take as you try to build inclusive communities within your congregations? So I sat at my desk and I pretended I was being in an exam and I sat down and answered the question. So I said, first of all, what is the definition of risk? Well, one definition is the possibility that something unpleasant or unwelcome will happen. Like somebody not saying good morning back to you. Very unpleasant. When I take the risk to say good morning, the risk is you won't get a response. And the possibility is I might internalize that and feel rejected, but it's really not about me. It's about that other person who is afraid to look at a guy with a collar on. African American, and my God, their heads went down. I walked from that parking lot, and my God, they couldn't wait to avoid me. I could take it personally, but I do this as a test of humanity. And every one of you, with your cell phones, looking into them. That's the antithesis of inclusion, because you're looking everywhere but where you should be looking. Out at the people. This is the original screen face, not that. The risk that I take on a personal level is to appear to be a hypocrite, someone who does not practice what he teaches and preaches. That's the risk I take. I must make sure that I model a lifestyle that is compassionate, welcoming, non-judgmental, and affirming of others regardless of their race, color, nationality, culture, ethnic background, religious, spiritual tradition, gender, sexual orientation, socio-economic condition, or way of life. That's what I must model. To build an inclusive community requires of me an unflinching trust in and reliance upon the power of God's word, because I am one of those beautiful souls connected to a sacred text. And my life is shaped and informed by that sacred text. And I must be faithful to that text. So I must become the text in my real life. It's not something I read, it is something I must become. I must believe what I read, teach what I believe, and practice what I teach. Did you get it? Should I repeat it? I must believe what I read, teach what I believe, and practice what I teach. So to build an inclusive community requires me this trust and reliance upon the power of God's word to transform the lives of people from diverse backgrounds, enabling them to build inclusive communities of love, goodness, and compassion. Next question. How do you reconcile theological beliefs with secular laws and values? Well, this was a tough one, but I said, well, I'll be as succinct as I can because this is a whole dissertation. Right. So whoever made these questions up, I want to talk to those people. Because this is not the kind of question you ask in a 12-minute framework. But I'll do the best I can to answer it. I reconcile theological beliefs, secular laws, and values with the foundational principle in understanding that every person is created with an intrinsic dignity and is deserving of respect and reverence. That's fundamental to me. I must firmly believe in my heart that every human being in this room has an intrinsic dignity, and we must simply respect and love that dignity buried within. I got it. So you just took 2 seconds away from me. The principle of dignity of a person is the thread that weaves our beliefs, secular laws, and values. That's the thread. From your experience, what struggles have been effective in building an inclusive communities? Well, I list from my experience the strategies that I have used in various places, and anybody who knows me knows that I have a whole portfolio of these programs, drawers of them. So anything that I've done, it can be pulled out and given to you as examples. But here are some of the ones that I listed. Ecumenical and interfaith scripture study, which I have done. I put ecumenical in because we have to work across the boundaries of Christians and Christians. There's a big fight just within Christians to be inclusive, and then beyond that, interfaith relations. Ecumenical interfaith dialogues and conversations. We had several of these at Westfield State University. True, Imam? Just say yes. Yes. Ecumenical interfaith prayer experiences, ecumenical interfaith community service projects, which we recently did at Westfield State to create a common goods food pantry to address the food insecurity issues at Westfield State University among the students. So with our Jewish, Muslim, and Christian students, we created this food pantry. Ecumenical interfaith dinner gatherings, picnics, and that nature. These are beautiful ways to build inclusive communities. I am finished. All right. Thank you for listening.
So I want to introduce Rabbi Amy Katz, who is shares ministry very close with me on the boundary of Springfield and Longmeadow. She is the rabbi of Temple Bethel since 2008. She has a column in Moment magazine, teaches classes at the Jewish Theological Seminary and the Davidson School of Education, and has served on the editorial committee for Seder Lev Shalem, the new prayer book for the conservative movement. She is serving the Longmeadow and Springfield community in a way with me where we overlap a lot and increasingly have grown in friendship. And I'm so delighted to welcome you, Rabbi Katz, as a colleague and a neighbor.
So first, I'll just ask your forgiveness for my running late, but physical therapy trumps all other commitments, as you can imagine. Hence, I can stand here and walk, which is a very beautiful thing. So for me, this question actually, I mean, I thought long and hard about how to answer it. It was actually a tough one for me. And I guess I want to go back by saying, you know, if you ask the members of my congregation if they're an inclusive community, their answer would be yes, of course. And if you ask them how, you know, would they want an African American, a transgender person, someone who looks a little bit different, somebody who isn't of the same financial status to feel comfortable when they come in the congregation, somebody who is mentally ill to come, the answer would be yes, of course we want that person, those people to feel comfortable and welcome. And so the trick for me is, there's this distinction between what I'm going to call the theoretical conversation and the practical one. Right? In theory, my congregants will all say, yes, that's what we're about. The challenge is how to translate that, and I want to just share some stories from my rabbinate and say, I don't actually know how this played out, I just know what people experienced. So 6-7 years ago, I taught an adult education class. It was a class that met from 9 to 11 on Tuesday mornings. And most of the people who were taking the class were non-working women in their 40s and 50s who had the luxury of taking a class between 9 and 11. And a lovely group of people, many of whom I actually call my friends. There were 2 men in the class who had just moved to the community. They were gay, they were married. After about 10 weeks, they came to me and they said, we're just going to drop the class. We're not welcome. People are laughing at us. So I like looked around the room and I thought, I know these people. I don't actually think they're laughing. I really don't think they were laughing at these men. But that's how the men experienced it. Were the women totally open, and did they run over and say, so glad you're here, welcome, let me buy you a cup of coffee during the break? Not so much. Were people friendly-ish and saying good morning? Yeah, they were, and when one of the men missed a class, the next week did someone say, hey, I missed you, I wondered where you were? I think so, but I want to be really honest with you, I wasn't noting that. What I know is that if you said to the women, well, actually, what I know is that when the men stopped coming, I decided I had to have a straight conversation with, well, that was the wrong word to use. I decided I had to have a direct conversation with the class, and I had to say, you know, I just want you to know that these guys dropped out, and here's why. And I debated that. I thought, like, should I just let them drop out and become defensive and say, that's not what we're about, or should I share this? And I decided that it was a teaching opportunity for the class to say, I know that none of us did this on purpose, and I threw myself in there as well, right? I know that none of us would intentionally want 2 gay men in a class of, let's say, 14 or 15 other women, working women, not working women, to feel like they're not welcome, but that's how they felt when they dropped the course. And we just talked about what it must have been like for the men to be in the class, and we talked about, were we all going out of our way to make these men feel comfortable? I couldn't really point a finger at the participants because it's not like, it really wasn't like they saw something, oh my God, as soon as he sat down, she moved to the other. It was nothing like that, but there was something there. And so for me, when you talk about creating an inclusive community, for me, I felt like there was a teaching moment that needed to be seized. And so that's an example. There's a man who comes to my synagogue every Shabbat morning. His name is Steve. Steve is mentally ill. Another congregant picks him up and brings him to services all the time. If you've been to my synagogue, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When his meds are right, he's okay. When his meds are off, he can ask me 20, 30, 40 questions like in a row, like right in a row. And I have to say to you, for me, it's actually quite difficult. It's a challenge to have Steve because he could take 20 minutes of my time, and there's a whole congregation that if I don't say hello to, I'm going to hear about it in the supermarket the next day. So there's this balancing act. And you kind of know that whatever table Steve sits down at, it's a tough table to sit at. Steve's been coming to my synagogue for as long as I can remember. And the fact of the matter is that it's this balancing act that we have, because you want Steve to feel welcome, you want him to feel comfortable, but he doesn't know from boundaries. And so people have to figure out, and we've talked about it, how do we establish boundaries where Steve is welcome, he comes, we bring him. I mean, somebody goes out of their way and brings him. By the way, I don't want my female congregants to be the ones to bring him, because he can sometimes say a few inappropriate things. Like when I got divorced, she said, Rabbi, I would love to take you for a cup of coffee. I think we would be a good-looking couple. Right, so I just don't want other, but he doesn't know. I mean, I really want to say he's been told he doesn't do that anymore, but it just, so we bring him. But I'm very mindful, and I don't blame people when they sometimes, it's Steve is sitting there saying, I want to acknowledge. But it's a challenge, and we talk about how do we help Steve feel comfortable, but how do we establish boundaries? And very honestly, when we have certain events at the temple, usually when there's alcohol that's being served or there are evening things, I don't really want Steve to come unless I know there's somebody who's going to keep an eye on him. Because as much as I want Steve to feel welcome in the community, I want to acknowledge that there's a community of people that need to feel comfortable. And so I want him to come, and I'll always pay for his ticket, but I need to identify somebody, I don't want to say babysit, to escort him. That's the nicer, more appropriate word. So that's another example of a piece where we're struggling with it. I was particularly proud this year on the high holidays because I thought I really did want to talk about the issues in this country. But, you know, if I talked about the ban on Muslims, it would have been like motherhood and apple pie, and everyone would have said, yeah, you're right. And if I talked, so I kind of came in through the back door, and I felt really good about it. My particularly what was nice is my oldest daughter really helped me in writing the sermon, which was like such a good feeling. But what I actually did was I came in the back door by talking about what the election had meant to us, and I actually talked about Vice President Pence, who politically he and I do not see eye to eye. I'll just say that to you. But I was really appalled at the country's reaction when he said, and by the way, now I'm feeling even more right than I did then, just from listening to the news this morning as I was doing my physical therapy, when he said that he doesn't go to lunch with women and that he doesn't like to go to a place where there's alcohol that's served. And most of my congregation used that as an opportunity to smack the evangelical community because they're terrible people. They are actually terrible people. Just ask most of my congregants. And I, first of all, the hair on my back goes up because some of my best friends are evangelical Baptists and Methodists. The other reason the hair on my back goes up is because how can we talk about millions of people in quite that way? Even if I disagree with them on particular issues, they're people. So I raised the issue with my congregation by first talking about what I'm going to call evangelical Jews, which is the Chabad community, which are people in my many people in my congregation have very warm and loving relationships with the Chabad world. And I talked then about a friend of mine who was offended that a Chabad woman would not shake his hand. And I talked about how my friend was, like, he got so judgmental and so harsh. And then I talked about Vice President Pence and our reaction to his religious convictions. And I just had to ask the congregation, what does it mean that we can't support and recognize the religious convictions of somebody who says, I don't like to go to lunch with a woman alone, or I don't want to be at a party where alcohol is served without my wife? How dare we judge someone for taking a stance like that if we want to really be respectful and open? Surely we can maybe think about where this individual has come from and what are the religious convictions, and then maybe ask the question, and how does that affect the women that he works with, if it does? And really, I'm willing to ask the next set of questions, but to deem the vice president as an immoral person for taking a stance like that doesn't feel right to me. And I wanted to challenge my congregation because that actually is something that many people in the pews of my congregation would be very quick to critique and to distance himself and to belittle the vice president for his religious convictions and at the same time, think of themselves as liberal and open-minded. And I wanted to push. And I really felt good about that because what I really wanted to do is push to say, can we find it in our heart to recognize that people come from different places. Now, I don't actually know that first of all, I'm not a social activist. Like, by wiring, that's not actually who I am. I'm really an educator. And so I carry with me this guilt of maybe I'm really not creating an inclusive community because I'm not on the streets in the way that others are, and I wish, it's just not who I am. But I want my community to be this place that is open, and I struggle with how I convey that message, given who I am and my limitations as a leader or my inclinations as a leader. And so those are some of the things that we talk about. I want to say last year, as a result really of the ban on Muslims and all the talk from the from the presidential debates, we had a class that our congregation offered. Rabbi Jacobson taught a class in Introduction to Islam. And we did that like in a deliberate kind of way because I thought that's something we can be doing to serve the community. But I have to say to you, there's a little tension that I feel because I really want my congregants to take an Introduction to Judaism class because they could really use that. The Introduction to Islam is really sexy, but the Introduction to Judaism they really need. And so I struggle with that piece of how to, but I try and create an inclusive community, I want to say, through education. And the very last thing I want to say is that the inspiration for this kind of work that I take actually comes from my father, who in the late 1980s, he was a dermatologist. And he led the Chicago medical community to the place of being able to treat AIDS patients in hospitals, and he was the crusader of organizing education around AIDS. In 1983 was the first conference he organized. And I always, I look at that and I think, whoa, that's a remarkable piece. And so the kind of work that I try to do is to say, in my world, because this is the world that I live in, how can I open people's eyes so that they can see sort of, not the inadequacies within them, but the limitations or the blinders that we all have. I mean, I have them too. I need someone to point out what my blinders are. And so I try and look at my congregants and help them see and open their hearts a little.
Thank you all so much. I mean, clearly what you have done is merely touch the tip of the iceberg, right, on this topic. But you have each in different ways given us some wonderful things to think about. And now is the time when we are shifting into small groups, which we will do, and I think probably Melika or someone else will come and, Olivia, will come and say a couple words of instruction to us. We'll have about 25 minutes, and then we'll come back to the large group, and then we'll usher in a time of some larger group feedback and conversation that will include our panelists. So thank you. Conversation, I want to invite someone from each table to say touch points that they heard at their table, but then also to permit the ability to interact with Q&A with our panelists would be a powerful thing for us to do. And I just want to say a word about ways in which to do it, because I know at our table, the more we started speaking, the more our own passions and emotions got raised. And so I just want to ask us to remember that, again, if we ask questions or summarize others' views, we want to be doing it with the dignity and respect to those views which may be different from our own, asking questions to learn and understand, not to trip up or provoke, respectfully disagreeing, accepting that others' views are valid for them, which is something we don't model well in our country, frankly. And also to hold each faith here in high esteem and positive regard as we speak. So would one of the people from each table be willing? Is there a table who would be willing to start? Would you start with just a brief, what you heard at your table?
Should also cut me off if I'm going too long.
Okay.
So we're a diverse group. We also included Buddhists and Quakers, Catholic, Jewish, Unitarian. One of the key things that was raised is who is being given the mic, who is taking leadership, who is taking voice. And that because the places of worship can be segregated along lots of different dimensions of diversity. So one would be class. And how could people speak for themselves who are in vulnerable groups rather than more well-resourced people taking up space? That was one thing that came up. Another thing was the work being done with teen interfaith and working on issues of like gender, how to really work. Where are you working? How are you making that choice of who's in the interfaith dialogue? Third and last thing was joining, one person spoke of stepping into a faith community, wondering if they were an outsider, and kind of questions of insider, and the joy of when you begin to talk about it, finding that your assumption that you're an outsider can shift.
Thank you very much.
Got to the second question and then only very briefly touched on that. So basically, I'm going to say that most of us live, work, or have experienced being in higher socioeconomic communities, but even within those communities have witnessed a lot of both self-segregation among economic, cultural, and faith communities, and have, whether that's either self-segregation or just societally, poor people will live in the swamplands, so to speak, in many communities. So recognizing that there's a real problem in breaking down walls when we are so marginalized from each other in so many ways, geographically, culturally, religiously. Also that people will follow the leaders, very much as Rasul had said earlier, that leadership is really key in helping break down these walls. And I think the biggest thing that I got out of this, and you all jump in if I got it wrong, but when we think that we have the answers, we don't actually have the answers. We've got like this much of the answer. So if you think that you have the answer, that's when it's time for you to go deeper. Did I do that?
Thank you very much.
So what I heard was first some ideas of what is the resistance, where there's a situation of resistance of a community to be fully inclusive. And sometimes there are not only breaking the ice, but breaking the idols within a community before you can even begin the work. Sometimes there's not really a lot of control, for example, potentially in a mosque situation, in terms of dealing with issues of gender or homosexuality. And in that case, if there's just a theological resistance that's widespread to that kind of inclusivity, one option is to create a liberal Muslim space other than a mosque. Another place of idea about resistance to inclusivity is that you might have a lot of conversations about, in theory, of course, we all want to be inclusive. And then when you actually begin an initiative and you get down to the details and the logistics of the project, actually implementing, suddenly the logistics are overwhelming. This may be the place to listen in carefully and then kind of re-raise the whole conversation. Okay, now that we're actually doing it, all of these things, when you said, oh, in theory, it's fine, let's revisit and see where we're really at. Okay, but let's say you do have a community that is very excited and going forward to work toward inclusivity. 3 things that were identified: explicit conversations about that inclusivity, holding structured, explicit conversations. Another thing is how to make people feel part of a tradition if they're not quite literate in that tradition. And so I guess to me this says regular opportunities for education. Okay, and then the third, which we heard about the idea of work. Okay, work as bringing people close together from the imam, and building structures, building actual opportunities for people, whether it's to do physical work, to study, but putting structures in as opposed to just have this sort of awkward, we have no explicit task, we're not organized in any way, like how can I actually get along with you, especially if I'm introverted, okay, but that there's stuff to do that we can participate in. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A little bit about how sometimes politics can be a divisive force and how that's very easy to creep into the faith and spirituality of the community, which can certainly split. We talked about deep-seated fears and prejudices we might carry either within communities of faith or within our families, and the way that those continue to linger and shape our perception of how we interact with others. We did talk about regular cultural prejudices and beliefs that were formed out of traumatic experiences, and how those tend to linger and become so intractable that it really becomes a challenge to do that. We talked a little bit about how to practice not closing ourselves off to others as different religious communities. And we just sort of shared some different stories about times where we felt included or excluded.
Also,
Sure,
add
go ahead.
that Reverend Sanderson, is that
Yeah.
Corey brought up the concept of radical hospitality. That I really love that term, and that's something that we all should be striving to practice in our communities, so that it gets at that issue of when somebody enters the room, is there somebody right away to go and shake their hand?
Yeah. Just very quickly, I was sharing with them that the best hospitality of any religious community that I've found is the Islamic Society in Western Massachusetts. That the hospitality is so high there that you immediately feel welcomed, and it's not a PR thing. It's not a program. It's natural and it just flows. And so to try to experience that sense of radical welcome and belonging is such a treat, and I think something that all of our communities can learn from.
Thank you so much. One issue came up was anti-Semitism, especially after Charlottesville, and how it disappeared. How the whole anti-Semitism issue disappeared after about the first week or two. So, and Hattie really brought that to our attention. And he, even on the Boston March, hoping that the Jewish issue would be present there, but it wasn't. And the Washington March that happened on Yom Kippur, a lack of awareness for the Jewish community and including them more. And also talked about, we have a few people from faculty here at Mount Holyoke, and one interesting issue that came up was teaching to diversity in the classroom, setting boundaries but giving space for diversity. That's really a delicate balance. And I know my daughter has talked about that too. She goes to an all-girls school in Boston, and she has said the same thing, trying to balance that. She can see the professors sometimes really struggle with that balance, trying to reach everyone, but also setting boundaries when people cross that boundary and aren't respectful, thinking they're being diverse or recognizing someone else, but not being respectful. We also talked about faith communities that are more homogeneous but maybe politically different, and how to have conversations, those difficult conversations, and making those, especially if it's a minority of another political belief, making them feel welcome in their own faith community. And certainly we see that happening around our country, where we can't even agree on politics or have conversations, and how can we model that in our own congregations. Also, we talked about a little bit of history of the Catholic Church, and when they started merging the different parishes of different ethnic groups like Polish and Irish, and how when that happened, how difficult that was for those mergers to happen. So that can provide an example, I imagine, for future work in that area. And let's see, is there anything else that I missed?
Seems pretty good.
Okay.
Thank you to all our tables. So one of the things we really want to honor is the process, how everybody at each table brings so much wisdom with them from their life experience and their personal community, whatever that is. And what a deep honor it is to sit with each other in this room. And so we just want to take a moment to honor that, even though we won't get to have heard everyone's voices individually. So I want to open now to Q&A, if that's all right, which gives you an opportunity to have an interaction more with our panelists about something they said or a question you have. And again, please remember, we're asking questions to learn and understand. So I invite you to do that. Please.
We've been talking a lot about racial diversity and economic diversity in our communities, and Amy brought up you brought up the issue of welcoming people with mental illness, which brings up a whole other issue of neurodiversity in our communities, people on the spectrum and where they may fit. And I distinguish that significantly from mental illness. They are not the same thing at all. But I'm wondering, to what extent are all of these ways in which we try to broaden our communities share things in common, and to what extent are these all separate issues?
So perhaps any one of you could answer that.
Rabbi at Westfield State University, when I have liturgy, I do my liturgy in conversation with students. So I don't preach alone, they actually have a conversation. And one of my students, 4 of my students are on the spectrum. So they become my conversation partner. So I set 12-minute homily framework, and the student comes up, and they're the most brilliant students you can imagine, the insights that come from reading the gospel, and people are spellbound by their insights on this gospel, but they feel so welcome. So the 4 now has become 8. So they go get their friends. They say, Father Savage, he lets us preach with him. So I see them all throughout the day. So it's really not about the Mass, it's just about welcoming them. It's really just letting them know that you have a voice, and you have wisdom, and this is the place you can do it and share it. So again, it's really not about the spectrum. It's about recognizing this beautiful soul has a beautiful, valuable heart, and I want people to see it. That's all it is. Now we also had, I think it was last semester, we had at my Mass Jewish students, Muslim students, and Christian students. They were invited to Mass. So I had the Jewish student get the Torah, and I had the Muslim bring the Quran, and we had an interfaith homily right at the Mass. That's inclusive, but it's truly Catholic.
So I just think there's an interesting distinction, because when people are on the spectrum, or Steve, or people with mental illness, part of what we have to do is figure out how we make room to respond to these individuals who clearly may not have the skills to be appropriate sometimes. At least that happens, and for different reasons, and I'm totally with you, they're not the same thing. But how do we respond and make room for these individuals in the community? And actually, I think, and so some of it is programmatic, like, so for example, for me, having a bar mitzvah or for a child for whom Saturday morning wouldn't work, like that's part of being inclusive, actually, is offering different liturgical opportunities for kids, for families and kids based on what they need, whatever the reason is. But I want to push back a little bit and say, that's a different skill and a different flavor of inclusivity than, oh, isn't it nice that I can sit with a Trump supporter and not smack him, or I can sit with an Obama supporter and not belittle him. Like, frankly, that's on us to open our minds, and that's a little bit different than working to say, I need to respond to this individual differently because this individual doesn't have the tools that I have. And so I think they're totally related, but they're different expressions of inclusivity that are really important. And I just want to say, like, for me, and synagogues used to be, you'll meet our standards because this is the way we do things here. And that's like the synagogue I was raised in, and it's certainly the synagogue I came to. And part of what I pushed hard for is to say, why does one size have to fit all? Why can't we individualize, and why can't we recognize that what works for this child is simply not going to work for this child, and let's figure that out and accommodate. That's a hard conversation, but I think that is a version of inclusion, actually.
Can I say something?
Please.
2 things. When I called that I wanted to come to this conference,
I said, on the literature, it doesn't have the word anti-Semitism. Is the word anti-Semitism allowed in this group?
It is in the literature.
Well, what I saw, it wasn't. And anyway, he said yes. So that made me feel really good, because I really didn't want, and what I've been experiencing, what I mentioned here, is invisibility. I don't want to be invisible, you know. So if anti-Semitism is on the agenda, that's fine. And then I wanted to say, you said it this morning, you used the word anti-Semitism, so that made me feel included. And then I go to the Jewish community of Amherst, and I asked the rabbi after Charlottesville, did anybody call him to say, wow, that was a real hit, that you must have felt terrible, we're with you, we want you to know. He said the only one who did was the imam from Springfield, so I want to thank him for that, because that meant a lot. And the ones that didn't, that meant a lot too, and not in such a nice way. Because Charlottesville was really hard for Jews, along with people of color, of course. But for us to drop off the radar screen like it wasn't, that wasn't okay.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Okay, I'm a little struggling to formulate the question, so I'll just talk it out. So a lot of what we talked about is welcoming others into our place of worship, whether it's a mosque or a church or a synagogue. So I have to say, as a person of a religion that is very much the minority in this country, my first thought, because of my experiences and people, mostly of Christian faiths, trying to convert me, that if I'm invited to a church, sort of a flag goes up, like, wait a second, what are you trying to do here? Mm-hmm. I have been in churches before and I enjoy it, but how do I get over that? How do people who are doing the inviting make it clear that that's not the purpose? Especially on college campuses, I've found. The college I went to, there was a group that specifically targeted Indian people and people from India, international students, and tried to convert them. In ways like, come over to our place for dinner. And then this conversion process started. So I guess I'm not formulating my question well, but how do we get over that sort of barrier where people of religious minorities, everyone should intermingle and experience how other people experience their faith, but kind of getting over that hurdle.
So I just, many Jews, I'm actually not amongst them, have this experience a little bit this time of year with the Christmas music and the Merry Christmas and all that sort of stuff. But I have to say, I think the way to respond to that is to really know who you are. So like, I actually like Christmas music. I listen in Sirius to 70 because I enjoy it. I really do. I love this time of year. I love the decorations. When I was a child, we went to Mrs. Niebuhr's and we decorated the Christmas tree. I could decorate a good Christmas tree, by the way. But I always knew who I was, and because it was so clear to me that I was a Jewish girl and that was who I am, at the core, I never felt actually like somebody was trying to convert me or change me. I think I always felt like they wanted me to appreciate their tradition. So I can't speak to the motives of others, but I can say that the one thing that I try very, very hard to do for my congregants, for my children, is I want them to know who they are. And I want to prepare them that there are a lot of people in this world that don't celebrate their holidays, that don't believe what they do. But if you're really confident and you really know who you are and what you believe and why you believe, you can hear others and you can take a deep breath and you can agree or disagree and you can celebrate the beauty of their tradition in a way that is not as intimidating. And I say that being very mindful that it's hard to know who you are, and it's a lot of work to be a minority in this country, and I really do recognize that because I feel so minuscule so often in this country of ours because everything isn't Jewish and it's not all about the Jews. But that's my response, and that's how I try and really get at it, so that when I'm in this other place, I can appreciate it and say, that's really lovely for you. It happens not to be mine, but isn't that interesting and isn't that lovely?
before we move on, I just want to know if any other panelist wants to respond to that.
Do you want to respond? I'll defer to.
Yeah, you go for it, because we're probably.
Well,
the
you
same
go ahead.
person.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
No, go ahead.
If he goes, I'm going to go. So somebody needs to go.
Well, we do it. We kind of share a sort of because of college campuses. Looking, and I'm going to speak only to that piece of it, but I think it broadens it. It works beyond it. We really, taking from Rabbi Amy's perspective on that, we really try to deepen the multi-faith component and expand that, because that's exactly the perspective we believe in. So we have a Hindu prayer room at Mount Holyoke. We made sure the accommodations reached out and that students get religious literacy on as many of the different faiths. We celebrate the Bali, the Vatri. We have all of these pieces and we educate with that so people will hear. So we have an interfaith luncheon every week. And we have those students who bring that forth, and we just did one on Wednesday on all the different, the season of light and darkness, and we had from Pagan Wiccan, we had from everybody coming in and giving the whole sense of the different belief systems for that period, and making sure the religious accommodations were there for halal, kosher, that we're trying to be as inclusive in that so people can celebrate and recognize who they are and feel confident in that space. And then now we're seeing much more openness. We've just put together a house, living and learning community that will begin next year on interfaith. That couldn't have happened 2 years ago. But because now they feel that they've been deepened and they have the confidence to be who they are, we have 4 proposals to review, which was really a celebration of this specific way of trying to enter deeply into celebrating who they are. So that's one piece.
So I just want to notice that what I'm hearing is an overlap of things, that if there's a worry that if we focus too much on hospitality and welcome, that we diminish or mush together in a melting pot the beauty of our particularities, and how do we negotiate those differences, right? Being able to respect and honor our particularities that are beautiful and meaningful to us, and also be together in a welcomed, connected way, because difference often makes us so uncomfortable, right? So it's how do we, we may want to really reflect on, I will call on you in just a moment, we really want to reflect on what are the things we can say that embody more of that. I'm curious, can you tell me about your faith, what you believe, what can I do that would accommodate, I'd love to learn more about you. How could we be welcoming while not assuming that in our 99.9% we then neglect the difference, which is so precious to someone. But please, would you like to speak?
If I may, as a professional inviter, bringing people into communities, if I'm going to invite you to come to church with me, it's my responsibility to be with you as a shepherd. You should not have to deflect any negative feelings. As the inviter into this community, that should be part of my responsibility, to walk with you, to share with you, and to get to know you so well that this congregation won't have any problems greeting you, because I'll take the hits because you deserve it. And a congregation isn't going to change until somebody is willing to take the hits against the cultural religious biases that we have. I think we need shepherds in all of our communities, or we're not going to break down a lot of those walls.
That's great insight. Thank you. Father Savage.
I deliberately mentioned to the rabbi in a response to what you're saying that I had Muslim and Jewish students at Mass so that they know they're not there to be converted, but to share their common experience of being loved and being welcome. That's all. It's just a table where we eat together. And my beautiful students not only celebrated that liturgy with them, but they prepared a meal together. The second liturgy took place in the hall, where they ate food together from their various traditions. All I'm saying to you is that we got to get out of our icebox. Our icebox is the denomination or the tradition we live in. We all know we live in that skin, but we have to expand the skin without losing our identity, but expanding our identity to know that we're all part of the same humanity. That we can eat each other's food without worrying about being converted. Because no matter what I do, I'm only supposed to tell you one message. and that you're loved and accepted. That's it. That's it. Anything else waters it down or creates a barrier. So the students who came, the Muslim students and their families and the Jewish students came, not because they're going to be converted, but they knew that they're going to be welcomed and accepted and loved without a problem. So anybody can come. We can go, we have Muslim students show up at Abbey Chapel.
They'll be there Sunday.
They'll be there Sunday.
So I'm so sorry, but we have to bring this part to an end so that we can have respect and space for the second panel, which is also very important. So I just want to say a one word of thought. As we break from this section of our day, I invite us to breathe them in, all the things we have heard, and to let them settle as seeds that are planted in us. Seeds that in our hearts will grow with time. May their fruit be plentiful and shared throughout our communities. What did we hear? What ideas came up for us that maybe now we can take out and further grow? And may we all have a moment to just reflect for a moment and hold in gratitude the sharing of this hour as a separate piece. In gratitude together before we move to the second half of our day, which I gladly turn over now. Thank you.